It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today's show was originally going to be all about Conor McGregor, but when I started looking around, he's gone kind of quiet and there hasn't been a whole lot of buzz around him. So we do have a few Conor McGregor questions, but the bulk of this is going to be around promotions, primarily the UFC, the PFL, and ONE. We do have a little bit of Conor information in there, a little Chandler information and things like that, but we have a lot of new stuff. So we wanted to make sure that we got that out first. But before we do all that, let's check in with John and see how he's been doing.
Good. Lazy, but good.
And see, I love that. That's great. Lazy is good when you're at home.
I'm drinking. Someone was so nice to send me a Waterloo orange vanilla soda, or not soda, but water, canned water, whatever the hell it is. But it's good, nice and. I mean, who could have been so kind?
I don't know. Probably a lazy person.
I mean, now if Waterloo is listening, they should be giving us a sponsorship.
They really should, because they're
just raving about it.
They're I don't know what you call this, soda, water, whatever. Yeah, it's great. Such sparkling promotion. It's sparkling water.
Look at that.
Look at that. All right.
I dropped the ball on that one, so never mind.
We totally did, but maybe we'll cut a commercial for them or something. Who knows? Maybe they'll just be like, hey, that was awesome. Here's money. Wouldn't that be dope? That would be so dope. But what's more dope is that we've got a great show planned for you guys, and I'm going to jump right in and kick off. So you recently got some ONE Championship information. What do you have for us?
I like the way you say that, like it's earth-shattering news.
It is.
But it's somewhat interesting as we follow ONE. What is interesting is a couple of things. Is ONE Championship will no longer be known. The parent company of ONE Championship, as you know, is called Group One Holdings. Full name Group One Holdings Pte Ltd. You know, they moved from the Caymans back to Singapore. It's going to be now known as a private company of limited shares in Singapore as ONE Championship, in parentheses, Singapore, Pte Ltd. So Group One Holdings is gone. It's now ONE Championship, in parentheses, Singapore. That will be the new corporate parent name. And it's lodged in office in Singapore. On top of that, they are they put out a new constitution for this company. And they also, on top of that, the third item we got is they've changed their shares. They've moved they had ordinary shares and preference shares, right? That was how the company had their shares out. They had something like $456 million in capital in Singapore dollars, and another 47 million or something like that, 45 million in US dollars in capital. That's the ordinary and the preference shares were in, and now they've got rid of the preference shares. Everything's in ordinary shares. So the amount of total capital in ordinary shares paid for ordinary shares is 679 million. And there's no more preference shares anymore.
Got a couple of questions.
I'm sure you do.
You mentioned first that they are moving from the Cayman Islands back to Singapore. What does that mean? What does that mean for their business?
Well, they might not really be moving back to Singapore. Let's put it that way. They have several companies that own shares called Group One Holdings, or actually I shouldn't say several, but a company called Group One Holdings, in parentheses, Cayman Limited, right? And so that's a holding company in the Cayman Islands. The company that does business as ONE Championship, or ONE Championship in parentheses Singapore, man, this is confusing, is now based in Singapore. So the question I have, is it the entire parent company is going to be in Singapore, or is their parent company actually that owns the shares is going to be in the Caymans, and a separate entity that's going to file and register in Singapore is going to be based in Singapore? That's my question. So I don't know for sure, but it looks like they still have a company that holds shares in the Caymans as well. They have two entities. Which one's the parent company? It looks like right now, from just looking at this, that one championship. Singapore is not the parent of it. It's the parent of it will be the Caymans. Now, what that means is it might not mean anything. It just might mean that's where the shareholders, that they invest their money there to one championship, and then one championship puts their money into the Singapore company. It could also mean they're kind of splitting up all the entities that made up Group 1 holdings, and basically only one championship is going to be in Singapore. And that would obscure a lot of their finances, because only the one championship finances would be reported in Singapore. And other finances would be done in the Cayman Islands, and there's always the chance of financialization and doing some chicanery over there to mask what your finances really are. So there's that. So we will look forward when the next filing ever comes out, if it gives us more details. But for right now, that's what I have on that front. Right. The other thing was interesting, I should point out. If you look at it on their new constitution and company, this suggests to me partly that they might have gotten or planned to get another investment in the company, someone to put more capital into it. As we know, they've raised $520 some million US on their last finances. Well, that lines up to $679 million of Singapore dollars, is what they report their total capital. That's got to be close to the end, right? The burn rate they've had would tell us that odds are that they don't have much money left. And so they might have made this move. One is they want to look more open by being in Singapore, and they might have had requirements by the investor that they have to do certain things, like move everything to ordinary shares from preference for the new investor, and then they might get another round of injection or infusion of capital. If they do, I'd guess, the amount they need, let's say, I'm going to guess 50 to 100 million in that ballpark, but who knows for sure? And who knows that they have it yet? They do have one, though. They have a change in share. They have a return of allotment shares, which is that it looks like, and I can't tell, it's in cash, of 2 million shares for $2 million. Which I cannot quite figure out what that exactly is, but that is that might be a new injection of cash, or it might be them paying out some cash, paying out some shares. So a lot of information here, and some of it's pretty confusing still. So we are going to work through it, and hopefully more filings will happen, and we'll have it figured out.
All right. My final question of those two questions that I had was, what do they gain by constantly changing the name? Because this is like the fourth name change, I think, or the third. Because remember, we started as One FC, One Fighting Championship. Well, and then we went to One Championship, and now we have another minor name change, but it just something. Why are they doing the name changes themselves?
Well, I should point the name change. The company that it does business under will still be One Championship.
Okay.
This is kind of like Zuffa becoming UFC Holdings. The parent company that runs One Championship is changing its name, but One Championship, the promotional entity, the way the public knows it, it's there. I've seen nothing says they're going to change their name right now.
Okay. One last thing right quick that just popped into my head. We had the news that they are partnering up with Russell Crowe's new movie, and that's coming out next year, and they will have a significant part in it because the retired MMA fighter that Russell Crowe is going to coach has fights in One Championship or something along those lines. Could that help them with their investment purposes?
I mean, it could. It's something that displays that they're a big promotion, air quotes, but an outsider looking in might look at it and say, oh, it's this promotion's big enough to get a movie using them. And also they might look at it and say, oh, this is a promotion getting its name and brand out there. Look at that. They're working with Hollywood stars. So I could see that being I'm sure they'll bring it up to any investors like, this is what we have going on with us right now.
Okay. All right. On to some Las Vegas news. So the Sphere show, it's all done. Noche UFC is in the books. And it seems to have been a success. And you broke down all of that in the last episode. Some numbers are also out from the Sports Business Journal about how Canelo's show did. So why don't you share those with us?
Well, both the Sports Business Journal and Dan Raphael had some information on it. They reported that the gate for the Canelo event is 17 million.
Wow.
And they also talked about the pay-per-view sales of between 600, according to Dan Raphael, between 650,000 and 700,000. I am not certain. I also heard it might be between around 600. Jake Donovan said between 550 and 650. I'm thinking that the Jake Donovan might be just the U.S. market, and Dan Raphael might be the North American, so that would include Canada, but I'm not certain about that. But it's a fairly good event, all things considered. With on kind of a new platform, the second event on Amazon, with competition across the street. Even though, as we know, that the audiences are different for boxing. There's not as much crossover as I think some people assume between boxing and MMA, and it's only. Although both will probably hurt somewhat because the more you sell, the more likely you're going to run into people that have to choose between the two events.
Okay. All right. So which one of those was the bigger success?
Between the Sphere, I take it, and the Canelo card, I would say it depends how you look at it. This is the part that's kind of intriguing, and I think that's interesting about the difference between big UFC events and big boxing events. On one hand, Canelo didn't have $20 million of production costs. They save on that expense. But on the other hand, they have a much bigger expenses for Canelo and Berlanga. The boxers on the card, especially the top of it, Laura, Caleb Plant, are making more than the UFC guys. So the 20 million production a lot of it's going to pay those guys. But if you look at it, what's interesting is the UFC event probably in many ways got more press, but more revenue is being generated by the Canelo event. And even if the UFC event sold as many pay-per-views, we don't know what the UFC event did on pay-per-views. But if you look at it, we said about the production costs, the UFC event did a $22 million gate, but they spent a lot more on production. So, it's kind of a push there. Canelo did 650,000 pay-per-views. The difference is if UFC does 650,000, they're locked in a guaranteed amount with ESPN because they sell them as a bulk. To ESPN, all their pay-per-views, ESPN, so they're going to get 20 million for the pay-per-views, no matter how little or how much. Where Canelo is going to get, the promoters of this are going to, their take from it after the split is probably going to be around $35 million. So almost twice what the UFC got, even if the UFC sold as many pay-per-views. Now for the UFC, it evens out because for every big event that they make less on pay-per-view, there's other events that sell maybe 100, 200,000 pay-per-views and they get 20 million. They get a lot of money. And so in some ways, if you're in a big event and a fighter and you're fighting on a big event for the UFC and you sell a ton of pay-per-views, the revenue you're making is less than, they could probably show you how much you made and it'll be less than what you'd assume. Partly because those sales are being bundled together with much less selling pay-per-views to get ESPN to pay the amount. And it works for multiple segments of revenue. The UFC probably made less on the commercial pay-per-view for this, even though it was in theaters and bars were showing it, just like Canelo, but they're bundling it again with pay-per-views that are doing much worse, shows that have much less interest. So they group them together, so it kind of averages out and aggregate over all of them. They make several million guaranteed per event, but for big boxing matches like this, you can actually charge more to the bars and make more money. And same with sponsorship because you don't sell the sponsors, international broadcast rights sometimes because you can do individual. In this case, he gets a big deal with Mexico. So you look at revenue-wise, the UFC event, I think I estimated a little over 60 million. I was probably being conservative, might be up closer to 70. But Canelo event probably did more revenue. The difference is that's from the event point of view, which did better. But from the promoter event point of view, because the UFC doesn't have to pay Canelo and Berlanga 80% of that revenue, they get to keep it. From their point of view, their event was a much bigger success.
Damn. Is Let me ask you something here. When you talk about bundling up those pay-per-views, is that affecting like those bigger name fighters?
Well, it doesn't affect them because fighters get a piece of, a piece as they call it, split. But UFC fighters don't really get a split, but they get a bonus based on how many pay-per-view sells. So they're not hurt really because whatever their pay-per-view sells, they get a cut of it. What it does kind of hurt though is negotiating leverage, because the UFC is no longer dependent on variable revenue. A fighter can't hold out and say, well, you're not going to have as good a year this year because I'm not fighting and I generate tons of pay-per-view. So if you want a good year, you got to pay me more. A fighter doesn't have that leverage anymore because UFC can look at it and say, you know what? You fight or don't fight, doesn't matter. We are still getting $20 million from ESPN, whoever we put on that pay-per-view. So on one hand, I guess I would say it doesn't hurt the fighter specifically because his pay-per-view bonus is not hurt by it, but it hurts him on leverage because fighters cannot hold out and get the UFC thinking. And we've seen it with John Jones, with Masvidal, with Conor McGregor. There's no, I guess in the long run, you could say it hurt them because they're not getting those sales that they could use in the next package. But the UFC on the short term, on that annual basis, they are not hurt by that fighter not appearing that year because they're going to make the revenue no matter what.
Okay. So we're going to swap gears here now, and we're going to go into the PFL because Don Davis was comparing the PFL's upcoming Battle of the Giants to the UFC and said that the PFL will end up paying more for their event than the UFC did. I can't imagine it being possible, but I'm sure you're gonna prove me wrong here somehow. But if it is, how did he get there? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!